Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon on this session on lifting the lid with donors. Really excited to be here today, and it's really a pleasure for us to be able to welcome some of our donors, but also members and such a diverse group of stakeholders. So just to let you know a little bit, our idea for the panel was to bring different views from the philanthropic and institutional funding space so that we can all get a better sense of the challenges and opportunities that donors are facing. It is clear to me that we are here at a pivotal moment for humanitarian funding. In recent years, crises have grown in number, scale, and complexity. Conflict, displacement, and natural disasters and climate change are converging in ways that strain even the most well-resourced of systems. Therefore, responding to these challenges requires innovative solutions and collaborations across sectors, including among donors. This is where both foundations and bilateral donors play such a critical role. Foundations bring flexibility, innovation, and commitment to finding new and effective ways to address needs. Meanwhile, bilateral donors provide the large-scale resources and infrastructure needed to sustain long-term, high-impact humanitarian programs. I strongly believe that together these two groups have the potential to create synergies that can amplify our impact tremendously. So today we're going to be exploring with the IKEA Foundation, the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and FCDO, what are the trends that they see in the funding space? What are the challenges? And we will also touch on ways we can work together to strengthen core humanitarian principles such as localization, anticipatory action, and resilience building. Yesterday, during one of the sessions, the panelists agreed that humanitarian action needed to be reframed around more than just short-term emergency response. The quote they used was, "We are the Band-Aid on a gaping wound." So with this in mind, our conversation today is not just about the challenges, but about the possibilities and opportunities for growth and innovation in the humanitarian funding space. So I'm really happy to be able to hold a discussion where we can explore with donors, how do they see the future? What do they think will create a more robust, responsive, and resilient humanitarian system? So I would like to introduce our panelists and also my co-host. So could we start please with the panelists, and then we'll pass on to Anna. Haley, would you like to start?
Happy to. Thanks, Ira. Well, hi, everybody. It's really lovely to be here. My name is Haley Kornblum, and I'm a program manager at the IKEA Foundation. The foundation is a philanthropy, and actually we have two main focus areas that our grant making goes to, and that's to sort of climate change and to livelihoods building. And while our support to emergency response doesn't actually fit under either of those two mandates, our board here at the foundation has always felt really strongly about helping in emergencies worldwide. And so I have the privilege of managing the grant funding that goes towards emergency response. And that also includes the less easy task of advocating for more funding to come towards the space. And of course, for that funding also to come towards the humanitarian space in ways that are, addressing some of the challenges that were mentioned on the first session yesterday. Actually, things like having funding available more quickly and more flexibly in times of crisis, and being able to adapt when a crisis goes from being a drought to being a flood, for example. And yeah, as Ira mentioned in her introduction, just to say, coming here as a philanthropy and not as one of the bilaterals, that means we also face a different set of sort of constraints and mandates as an organization. So we can be more flexible, for example, but we don't have the same budget sizes necessarily as the bilateral organization. So yeah, you'll hear from me more today on that viewpoint, and very happy to be here alongside colleagues from FCDO and the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs to talk a little bit about where we're different, but also where we have very shared visions. I'll stop there.
Laura, would you like to come in?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. My name is Laura Briggs, and I hope my internet holds. We're in the Netherlands, so it's always challenging. I am working for the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I'm part of the humanitarian team. And that means that I cover topics such as locally led humanitarian action, accountability to affected populations, protection against sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, and internally displaced people. And from a personal note, I thought I would give a personal introduction also. I really always felt a strong urge to help decrease the suffering in the world and to make it a better place, to use a line from Michael Jackson, which immediately shows how old I am. But anyway, this urge has only become stronger when our son was born and we lived in Africa, and then we see kids of my son's age who then need to help feed the family. So I really look forward today to talk to you and to together to explore how we can move away from intent to impact, like Christina said yesterday, and really make this lasting, meaningful change system. Because as you will hear me speak today, the Dutch government really wants to focus on systems change, because we believe that even though we are a considerable donor, it's still only a drop on a fire. We need to really make a change, and the change comes from a systems change. So that's why I think it's time to start walking the talk and see how we can do that and how that looks differently for an institutional donor or for a philanthropic donor. So I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Nikki?
Lovely, thanks, Ira. Hi, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here today. I'm Nikki Jens. I'm a disaster risk finance advisor at the FCDO, so that's for the British government. We're a founder donor to both Start Fund and Start Ready, and we're organised a little bit differently to the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in that our humanitarian budget and our disaster risk finance budgets are completely separate in separate departments. So my budget in particular, my projects are ones that support new disaster risk finance and the establishment of new disaster risk finance. They support innovative finance and new ways, sort of exactly the kind of work that START does. So new ways to make the system work better, basically. So we have some premium financing grants, we have technical assistance, mainly for countries, but also humanitarian agencies like START and like the World Food Programme and others. And 100% of my budget is climate finance. So I'm using our climate finance and also thinking about how Start Network and our partners can access climate finance, particularly for fragile and conflict affected states and small islands, but for all countries where they're climate vulnerable and they need more finance flows. I also work in a department, international finance, that works on the World Bank and the international financial system, thinking about reform and how that system becomes more shock responsive and more in tune with what developing countries are asking for, particularly through the British Initiative currently that Mia Motley is leading. So we know that humanitarian budgets are really stretched. And so for us, this is how we innovate and use climate finance well to make sure there's the right money at the right time in the right place to respond to need. So great to be here today and looking forward to the discussion. Thanks.
So thank you all. Anna, would you like to introduce yourself, my superstar co-host today?
Thank you, Ira, and it's a great pleasure to be here and co-host this very relevant session with you. So, hi everyone, my name is Anna Farina. I lead the Crisis Anticipation and Risk Finance team at Star Network. I've been with the network for 5.5 years, and I have the pleasure to work very close with Ira and also to our donors, because I'm the one like spending the money that Ira collects and that our donors provide. So my team work on building disaster risk finance system in different countries, and then link them with the anticipatory action mechanism, the Start Ready, and disburse the funds when a specific hazard are predicted. So really look forward to the discussion today.
Amazing, and thank you. I realize I didn't introduce myself, but I think Anna gave you a clue to what I do, which is to help raise funding and bring to life our programs for Start Network. So lovely to be here, and I'm really excited about this conversation. So to start, and I think it would be great to just, for our panel to set the scene, is it would be great to know from the different perspectives that you come, different departments, climate financing, humanitarian financing, philanthropic, is, what stands out to you regarding the current trends around anticipatory action, localization, or, the humanitarian sector as a whole? What are the things that are really coming out to you right now? And maybe we can start with Nikki on this.
Lovely, thanks, Ira. So I think I might turn the question on its head actually and start first of all with the humanitarian sector as a whole. And I think the most worrying trend there is just the scale of the need and the increasing need because of climate risk. We can see the climate risk escalating across the world. We can see impacts escalating across the world. And increasingly now what we're doing is helping communities to respond to disasters that are on top of an increasingly bad baseline of climate risk. So I think the most worrying trend there is that there's just huge stress in the global humanitarian budgets. There's not enough money and there's increasing need. And so we need to be just working much smarter, thinking about innovation whenever we can, pulling in the private sector and others to help us help meet the need, because the public sector finance will never be enough now to meet the needs, both to respond to climate change and also to respond to the humanitarian need. So I think it's now thinking about how we innovate, how we get outside the box and really bring in new ideas, which is one of the things that appeals most to us actually about working with Start Network, because that obviously is your raison d'etre. Generally on anticipatory action, we know it makes sense. So we're very much one of the converts on anticipatory action. The UK government is trying very hard to pivot as much as our assistance as possible to anticipatory action. We know it's more cost effective. We know it's more dignified. We know preempting damage makes good sense. We also know that currently only 1% of humanitarian funding is prearranged, and a tiny amount of funding is anticipatory action, and actually dispersed in anticipation of impacts. So I think we're also thinking about the big picture and how to try and encourage other donors to take on these things, and try and get around the nervousness that they may face in anticipation. And so helping to learn as well. I think the trend will be around learning and evidence and evaluation. And the same with localization. I think it's very much trying to preempt some of the issues and trying to sort of spread the word. It makes good sense. So why are others not doing it? And how can we encourage that this is an approach to grow?
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you for that. Laura, what are your thoughts?
Thank you. Yeah, first of all, I agree largely with what Nikki has said. And I think that I would like to add to that a trend that I see and that I'm not happy about is this increased idea that we could do things alone. I see that there is this tendency to focus inwardly, focus on national interest, national interest basically, and I don't think that's the way forward. I think that only by working together, working side by side, accepting each other's strengths and weaknesses, we can actually make a lasting and durable impact. The system change I was talking about before. And at the Dutch government, we really think that locally led humanitarian action is the way forward. And I think what I wanted to, if there are 3 points I want you to remember from what we as the Dutch government find important, then it's complementarity, trust, and to amplify the voices and wishes of affected populations. Because I really think that we can't do it alone. We need each other. And that means, and maybe that's a bit strange in this session on the strength of localization and importance. So don't get me wrong, localization is extremely important, but I do not think it's the only solution, in the sense that we still need the other actors as well. And we can't have a system of only local actors. I do believe they should be in the driving seat, and and that will really give a dignified and impactful, efficient response. But everybody has a role to play. Local actors, UN, INGOs, governments. So that's why I think that, and that brings me to the second key point, we should really start to trust each other. Trust is such an important aspect, and it will help if we really want to make this mind shift and this power shift. It's a prerequisite. And the Dutch government has been working as trying to help increase trust by working on a risk sharing framework together with ICRC and Interaction. And I really think that this is also one of the trends I see, that the people are trying to look at ways like how can we contribute to making the system more fit for purpose. And we hope that this risk sharing framework will increase the trust that I think is really necessary to make the system work. And then the third point I wanted to emphasize is the necessity to amplify and act on the wishes and needs of affected populations. Because only if we involve them at every step of the way, then we can really have a system that is true to their needs and wishes. And that's not only important from an accountability perspective, but because they have the right and they have the lived experience, and because of them, there can be the highest quality of aid, and the aid being provided at the most appropriate time and space and manner. So that's what my thoughts on this point. Thank you.
That's really interesting. And I want to come back later, but I think I want to also hear what Haley wants to say, because I already heard something there about trust and I have a question. But Haley, do you want to share what are your thoughts on the trends that you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, really echoing Nikki's perfect articulation of some of the worrying trends in the humanitarian sector overall. I guess maybe one thing to add, and not just repeat everything that's been said, is maybe in the philanthropic spaces I see, which have a slightly different flavor a lot of the time, there's so much more focus on all of the jargon around kind of climate funding at the moment. And often the conversations to me seem very future oriented, you know, thinking about how do we avoid hitting 1.5, but not really thinking enough about the impact today already of climatic events that are already leading to emergency action in many of the countries that are most affected by climate change, and not necessarily those responsible for it. So I think, you know, given what Nikki has said about like searching for more climate finance, I have this hope that we can start brainstorming as donors and as the humanitarian community on how we can draw attention to the sort of the overlap between all of the climate funding and then the obvious need for funding because of climate crisis in the humanitarian sector. Yeah, and maybe just to say, I can understand why there is so much talk about the future and what our world will look like in, say, 50 years and what happens to all of us when we exceed the 1.5 degrees. But I think as donors, we should sort of equally be answering to the predicament that we're already in today, and, you know, helping where we can for those who are already facing and suffering the consequences. And then maybe just on a slightly more positive note, the rapidly growing space of anticipatory action is really quite an exciting trend. I think, Ira, maybe we even spoke about this all with the donors in our recent trip to the Philippines, that the space is growing really fast from, you know, 4 or 5 years ago when no one really mentioned anticipatory action so much. There's a lot more discussions about it now, and that's really exciting. And I'm maybe just to say that I'm hopeful that the growth will maintain a spirit of collaboration, because I know, and the Start Network team is of course very familiar with how complex and costly it is to build these mechanisms well. So, you know, just to not be duplicating all of these mechanisms, but equally, I'm glad that we're all thinking about it a lot more. I think it's a really important direction that we're going in. I'll stop there.
Thank you. I mean, can I have, and I have actually 2 questions, but the first one is, can I ask you, Laura, a question about, you said trust. What does trust look like in this space?
I think it's a two-way process, and it's easiest to explain by going into distrust. Distrust, as in the a completely unrealistic idea that local actors would be more prone to fraud and misuse of funds and corruption. It's not true. We all know it, but somehow it muddles through. And I think that there should be more trust from funders and donors based on evidence that that local actors are to be trusted. At the same time, it also works the other way around. For local actors to trust donors, that they can speak up and speak out, that they can be open if something happens, because of course it could happen, and of course it also, not of course, but also sometimes it does happen. And well, it can happen, let's just deal with it. So the trust that we as donors would not immediately stop funding or be inconsiderate or whatever. We have this saying that we have zero tolerance to inaction, not so much to the actual fact, but to the inaction of it. And that starts with having the trust that you can come forward to us and say, listen, something's gone wrong, or listen, I have an idea that something might be going wrong. Can I talk to you about it? So two-way trust, I think, is what I meant, and what I think we should work on collectively.
Thank you. And it's almost like building that, equal partnerships, right? Where you can both sit at the table and tell what's working and it's not working.
Which
And
is a nice segue to the, if I may, Ira, to the next point, because if you say, what do you need? That was going to be my point. What do we need to actually accomplish that? You need to have equal access to simply get to the meeting point, for example. If we're all going to have meetings in New York and Geneva, it will be more challenging for local actors to come simply because it's far away, it's expensive. So there should be equality in access to transport and to funding to make that possible. But also we can think about language. This meeting is in English. We have interpreters, which is great, but I'm sure they're not translating into some local language. So these are all challenges that we should be aware of, that we need to address. And I must say, I don't have the solution and the answers to everything, but I do think that this is one of the gaps and the problems that I see in order to really have this equal partnership and this possibility to work on the basis of equality together, to really be able for everybody to say what they want to say, to participate in information decision making, coordination, these kind of things. And the other last point, and I'll stop because I've talked too much, I'm sorry, but is for, if necessary, I'm not saying it is, but if it's necessary, to work on increased confidence. And as the Netherlands, we are exploring ways how we can team partners together in kind of a mentoring or peer-to-peer learning system, so that they can walk alongside other partners to see, how do you do that? How does a meeting with the UN work? How does a meeting with a donor work? What can you expect? What can you say? How do you prepare? What can you expect to come out of it? So these kind of things, I think, are now still gaps, but they provide really concrete and tangible opportunities. And this is also where I think the network can come in to increase the role and influence of local actors. And I'm very happy with what you're doing at Start Network, because you are also really making this happen.
so I guess it's a good segue into our next question. And I guess, here we obviously have a lot of members and different stakeholders who've joined this call, but it would be great to hear then, what are the gaps and opportunities that you see a network effect could address? We've talked with a lot of donors who talk about Start Network and our members, we need more aggregators, pool funding, but what do you see are the opportunities that you see, well, the gaps and opportunities that you see that a network effect could address? And it would be great maybe to start with Nikki.
Brand, yeah, happy to. So I'm going to, I guess, first of all, build on exactly what Laura has just said. I think a network of members builds each other up. You're working with each other through the tiered due diligence. You have the ability to bring in partners who are kind of much smaller, local or community-based organizations, and actually help them work with the larger organizations and access access international finance, think about how they work with donors and how they work kind of at that kind of in terms of financing a level up. So that capacity building, I think, is completely essential. I think the network allows you to access scale. For the smaller NGOs and community-based organizations, it's very hard to access money from big donors. It sounds a bit ridiculous when I say it, but for us, a grant of £10,000 is exactly the same amount of admin and due diligence as a grant of £10 million. And so we're actually not allowed to make small grants. We're really not allowed to, because it's too much work for a small grant. So we need to work through a network. We need to work through a network where we know that the quality is going to be assured. So START has the due diligence. They have those standards that are set amongst members and are maintained mutually. But also that you have the systems that actually can manage the money and sort of centralize the quality control. So we also know that you have a really strong eye on technical quality, for example, with the technical team in London. And so that adds a huge amount of value for us. And I think as individuals, it would be really impossible to imagine that individual members would be able to sort of deliver on those on that kind of scale of engagement individually. So that network is really building a huge amount of capacity and opening up real opportunities for everybody. I think it also, as a network, is there are other things you can bring in, like the shared weight you have basically in terms of advocacy at national level. I think you're able to bring in this huge groundswell of genuine information from communities that's immediately feeding up to a network that you can then feed up to government and help to influence at a higher level. Really, really important, I think. I think also as a network, you've worked really hard to build on things like Forewarn. So you have national experts who are able to provide their information through Forewarn to members in, again, an incredible resource that individual members would struggle to have anyway, otherwise. So all super useful. And I think generally, just in terms of an opportunity, sorry to go back to climate finance, but it is kind of the direction of travel for the really big donors like us. And a network or some kind of quality aggregator is really the only way I think it's going to be possible to access that climate finance and make sure it actually does flow down to local level and to communities properly. Otherwise, there's a real risk it will get stuck in capital cities. And I can't remember, Ira, if it was you or if it was you, Hayley, the other day mentioned the statistic that Mercy Corps estimate that less than 10% of centralised funding ever leaves capital cities. That's exactly what we're seeing in some of our other programmes. And the direction of travel that we see in climate finance is that most of the money will be in country-based programming. And that is a huge risk, frankly. So we need really good quality networks and aggregators to make sure we can have that money flow down to communities and down to the people who need it. So I've tried to be more positive rather than the gaps. But yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for the network effect. And I think you've really demonstrated the value. And the way you've delegated responsibility and money, and everything is generally generally flowing down, and then you've got the hubs being set up. So there's a real empowerment, I think, that you can feel across START Network, which is just so positive to see. So in terms of localization for us and thinking of networks, you're our major partner in that, and so we really appreciate it.
Thank you, Nikki. And I think it is for us, our idea is that obviously we as a network, we hope that we can capitalize on that, making sure that our hubs are a critical part of that network effect also in those countries. And Hayley, do you have any thoughts on this specifically?
Overall or on overall? Yeah, I guess for the foundation, well, the most obvious opportunity for us to partner with START Network is that it makes sure that we're not sort of ad hoc deciding with our limited experience and expertise. And when I say our, as I mentioned in my introduction, our emergency response team is me, so that we're not basing our decisions on which emergency I may think seems most relevant in any given moment, but that in fact, of course, the decisions are coming from the members who are humanitarians on the ground and know what's needed where. And as Nikki mentioned, we cannot run small individual grants in all of these places. And so there's a huge benefit to us to be able to put our resources somewhere that can do that in a much more experienced way. There is another massive opportunity in the fact that Start Network seems to be building collaboration across the humanitarian sector, which is otherwise unfortunately designed in a way that puts all of these NGOs and all of you as members often in competition with each other for the limited funding available. So I really appreciate the collaborative nature, and we see it when we get to visit on the Start Network donor trips as well, how members are collaborating. And of course we see in how alerts are triggered as well, in how that collaboration takes place. And lastly, I think for foundations like, well, for IKEA Foundation anyway, to focus on localization, which we really do talk about as an important value, to do this in emergency response is so incredibly challenging because we want the limited funding we have for humanitarian response to have a more global footprint. And that's really one of the major reasons we're supportive of this work and grateful for the member-led approach. All that said, maybe just to mention, I don't know that I would call it a gap necessarily, but that we're sort of still remain cognizant that there's so much more to do on localization. And things that come to mind are, ensuring that national and local NGOs have the support they need to respond, and that they even feel equal in voice to the international NGOs that you may sit next to when you're having Start Network discussions for funding, for example. And localization just feels so much more complex in this space. I don't know if that's as compared to other spaces, but in the rest of my work here at the foundation, we have a geographic approach, and we don't do that in the emergency space. But localization seems less complex when I just focus on one country. So I'm not sure that can be or should be the responsibility of a network to address. I don't know how you would then prioritize, addressing power imbalances as a priority versus responding to emergencies, which is your actual mandate. But I just want to recognize that we sort of all in the space have a lot more to do in that regard.
Thank you. Laura, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I actually gave you my thoughts mostly already, but I want to highlight what I think is really the opportunity of the Start Network is also the innovativeness and the fact that you're not afraid to take on new challenges and explore new things, because one of the gaps that I see is we now have there's a lot of work being done in the climate field on how you can prepare, how you can anticipate, and there are beautiful models, etc. on that. But for the conflict side, this is still mostly lacking. And I really appreciate that Start Network is through Start Ready is looking into this and trying to explore where change can be made in that sense. And that would be one of the points I would like to make, and the opportunity I see. One of the reasons for us that we work through Start Network, as well as the fact that you have such a large reach, and that's it really starts, and that's why your name is probably also well chosen. It starts with the local actors. They are the ones raising the alerts. They are the ones deciding if it should be activated or not. And I think that is really a value that I greatly value and happy about. And yeah, great, keep it up.
And may I ask a question on this? And this has been mentioned a little bit. I mean, it's been mentioned by Nikki, it's been mentioned partly also by Haley, but how do you see, I mean, we talk about obviously opportunities in the climate space and so on, but the reality, and I guess this is coming a little bit from being in a fundraising team and, working many years for organizations trying to fundraise, is it does seem like the funding, from the donor side is siloed. Like there is a pot for humanitarian, there is a pot. The reality is that when we're facing all these crises, it's a continuum that's dealing with the complexity of various components. So this is a challenge. How do you see this? I guess you realize that you're slightly siloed in some spaces, and maybe for Haley's a bit different, but it would be great to hear from Haley's point of view, but also from Nikki and Laura. How do you see that? Nikki or Haley or Laura, who wants to come in? Don't want to put you on the spot.
Ira, can you repeat the question just in one sentence?
Sorry. I guess what we see is that, yes, there's opportunities for climate funding, but at the same time, when we're applying for humanitarian funds, there is an element of climate, there is an element of humanitarian response. And it seems like donors need to bring this more together and acknowledge this to make things easier on the other side. Like, do you have any thoughts on this? Sorry, it was not a short sentence.
I think it's a risk. I think it's necessary. Let's start with that. Absolutely. But if I look at my own country and the political changes we're going through, I'm hesitant to do that because somehow humanitarian work is often seen as an absolute necessity and it needs to happen, while the more development work, very wrongly, is not always perceived that way. And I think so what we are trying to do, and this is why I like the developments on the Nexus, you're all trying to say, yes, you need to, and in the emergency phase already, prepare for the next phases, because the end of the last emergency is the beginning of the next one possibly, or etc., etc. But there is a political risk in linking it too much. And I do think that there is also a solution, and the solution is educating the people that the work that's being done in the climate field, in the more purely development field, is very necessary, and also decreases the risk of having humanitarian emergencies. Decreasing the amount of money needs to be spent on that. I don't want to always talk about money, because it's more important that you prevent the loss of life and the suffering. But unfortunately, the money argument is one that is made. So the mind shift is not only there in the international arena, in the UNs and the national collaboration and coordination for us. It's also very much at home. I don't know, Nikki, how it is for you, but for me, it's also very much at home, educating the people. Listen, you need to invest in development work because that will prevent emergencies. But it's more difficult to explain.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that candid answer, Laura.
I can maybe come in as well and just give a few examples of how we're trying to break down those silos a little bit, because you're right. As a sort of major donor, we have programs that have business cases that are fairly siloed. So with our disaster risk finance now, we have 2 programs where we're also funding risk reduction as part of the programs explicitly. So we're trying, first of all, we're working with partners or even we're not funding it, we're working with others who are funding it. But in a UNICEF proposal, we're working with UNICEF to actively reduce the risks to their country programs from tropical cyclones in 8 countries in the world. And they're doing that with a variety of donors, including their centralized funding. And only then are we then offering the support for the insurance. So we reduce the risks first. That's always the way to go. And then you insure the residual risks. We're doing the same in the Caribbean with water utilities. So a completely different sector, public infrastructure, critical services, thinking about how they can reduce the risks to their water and wastewater services going offline basically after flooding or hurricanes. And so we're building the resilience first and working with them on that, thinking about all the service continuity planning for a disaster, but then also funding the premiums for the insurance. So there'll be a payout if there is a if there is a hurricane, for example, and then that will allow them to sort of put their emergency response plan into action and get things back up and running again. But I do take the point, Ira, that we're too siloed. And I listened yesterday to the humanitarian trends discussion as well, and I thought it was really interesting. And I think your name was Idris Dar, and I saw you had a question in the chat as well a minute ago. I really heard your point about the inflexibility from donors, and it really made me very sad, and we have to do better on that. I know that certainly for my partners, if anyone came to me and said, our program was designed in one way, but actually circumstances have changed, things that are different now, I would move heaven and earth to allow them to change the program and be responsive to that. It comes back to Laura's point on respect. We can't just ensure that we do the same thing because that was what was agreed. We have to be flexible, and the more the climate changes, the more flexible we need to be, really, because we need to be thinking on our toes. And that's where the information right from grassroots, from community level, feeds up to make sure we're doing the right thing. Because with the best will in the world, people in capital cities may not even know what the actual current issue is in those communities, and therefore, inadvertently we might not be addressing the actual need. So I think there's a big feedback loop that we all need to be building in to all of our work, and listening more and being more responsive. So that's definitely a point I've taken away from the discussions in the past 2 days to do more on.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, thank you. Super. I mean, it's great to hear, Nikki, the examples you give, and really, really useful. I think we are on a journey, and again, I guess a little bit from our experience, and our donors have been incredibly flexible with us. I mean, I've had conversations with also with Haley, where she says, well, you actually can do what you want with that grant within the scope of the remit of Start Network. But I think that flexibility means a lot to partners in general, because it enables you to achieve, the outcomes in the best way possible. But I also, I know, and I'm a little bit also conscious of time, because we want to open up for questions from the different people who attend. And I guess one of my last questions is to all of you is, we talk a lot about localization and anticipatory action, which are key areas for Start Network. But at the same time, it would be great to know, what are the challenges that you're facing as a donor? Like you've mentioned, you need scalability in some cases. Well, I think all three of you have mentioned that scalability issue, but what are the other challenges that you're facing to be able to fund these areas that a lot of the people in this call are really interested to know? Haley, do you want to start?
Yeah, happy to. I mean, I don't think it's an extremely helpful answer, though, because I don't think, given that the foundation has a lot more sort of flexibility in that sense, I don't actually think we have a huge number of challenges in terms of localization. I think where the challenge comes in, as I mentioned in my previous answer, is when if we are to ask ourselves to make sure that our emergency response funding, which is extremely limited compared to the rest of our organization's grant making portfolio, to have a really strong localized approach for that. And so the best solution we have, and I'm very grateful that it's such a successful solution, is to fund the Start Network in order to make sure that funding gets to where it needs to be, and in a much more localized way than we could do under emergency response. Where I think we can do more is in the rest of our grant making, where we are funding many sort of livelihoods interventions, for example, which I think speaks a little bit to the question about silos. And we have a much smaller geographic mandate than FCDO and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, for example. But, in East Africa, where a lot of our interventions happen with smallholder farmers, access to energy and farming inputs, etc., there I think that we can do a lot more. And I think the challenge is just walking the talk. I don't actually think that we have any internal restrictions that stop us from doing it. We need to just get on with it and actually do it. And we talk about it a lot internally, and we are making strides, but I'm sure everybody here knows that no one's moving fast enough in that regard.
Thanks. Laura, do you have any thoughts? And I know you being great advocate of locally led action, you might have some.
Yeah, I do, but I was nodding vigorously, because walking the talk is what I also think we should doing, and then it frustrates me so much that we're so slow. We are so slow, and I'm part of a political organization, so I should actually be used to it, but it frustrates me nevertheless. And So I think that the biggest challenge I have as representative of the Dutch government is that we really need to have political buy-in, and that you are every 4 years, if you're lucky, if it's not sooner, then the politics might change, and you need to move to that. And we try to, because like Nikki, I also like to focus more on the positive things. We tried to set up programs which are longer in duration, which have larger impact, which are across sectors, across countries, having a strong built-on effect, learning from each other. At the same time, we are also challenged by time and capacity, like we've mentioned before in this webinar already. So and I do think that the time and capacity problem is not so much a problem because we have great partners. And I was reading the chat at the same time, and I saw the question about holding intermediaries accountable. And I think that is really something that we can do, is to, on the one hand, push our constituency, our organization to be more bold, and at the same time to push our partners to do what we maybe can't do, and to be the advocate, to be the implementers of what we advocate. And yeah, so that's what I'm thinking at this point.
Can I ask you a short question on that, Laura? Do you feel, because I feel like that would be like a good starting point in the sense of saying, right, we would like to see much more, and therefore, you're a donor at scale. Therefore, you have the potential to indeed push partners in that localization agenda, for example, and so on. Do you think, is that easy or hard for you as a donor to achieve that, do you think?
It's a bit double, because what I started with, the trust issue, goes both ways. I honestly don't think that my partners who are not doing so great on localization are not doing so great because they don't want to. I think that across the board everybody agrees that localization is the way forward, but they too are constrained by things that I might not even be aware of. So I try to move to start from this position that everybody wants it, but what we need to know is where lies the problem. And that's why I think that this I mentioned before, this risk sharing framework is really a solution, because what we need to do is to tease out where is the problem. Just for example, I can give a concrete example. So we have piloted this risk sharing framework in certain countries, and then one of the things came out was that local actors have problems paying the insurance for their members to be in case something happens. Paying an insurance claim is not a very difficult thing, maybe for an intermediary, but maybe they feel that they can't do it because a donor might say A, B, or C. So, but we didn't even know that this was a problem. So just sitting together and having the discussion, like, why are you not taking good care of your people? And then, because of the dialogue, finding out where the bottleneck was. So if we start from the precipice that everybody is positive, has a positive inclination towards this, but is constrained by things that they might feel uncomfortable of saying, then can we create this atmosphere of trust where we can find each other, and where we can have this honest conversation of, okay, this is my problem, and then find out that somebody can actually solve it or not, and then we know what to work on. So it's a bit double.
Thank you so much. And Nikki, do you have any thoughts, any challenges on your side?
Yes, so I was going to come in with a couple of related points, actually. So I get the 2 points I think most impede the international community on doing more on anticipatory action is scale and evidence. And I think, we're very lucky with Start Network and with our fellow donors to Start Network, in that we all believe that this is the right way to go. So we're all converts and we all work together really nicely on that, and we're very supportive of your approach. But there are lots of other donors, including some very large donors, who are much more nervous. And so we need evidence to show this works, and it works better than the other approaches. So it's why it's so important that there's really good monitoring and evaluation of responses, why it's really important that we talk to beneficiaries and get direct feedback that things worked, or how they spent the money, whether or not that did actually preempt damage, if it did allow them to recover quicker. You know, all those things are really vital to then be able to spread the word and say, look, anticipatory action has worked brilliantly here. It's really good. And, you know, we talked about value for money as well, about value for money comparisons of different types of interventions. And there are some absolutely amazing value for money stories around anticipatory action, where really very simple things have avoided huge damage. So we were all lucky to, several of us were lucky enough to go to Madagascar last year and to see school roofs that had stayed on because they had sandbags on them, and compare that to school roofs that had disappeared, just been ripped off in tropical cyclone winds. And you know, the damage there is hugely expensive to repair a roof. It's thousands of dollars to repair a roof, but much more fundamental, it takes ages. And in the meantime, the children have no classroom, and children drop out of school, particularly girls, and often never go back. So in terms of value for money, those sandbags were just extraordinary value. Literally a couple of dollars, maybe, I mean, literally if that, saved, sort of preempted and saved thousands and thousands of pounds of damage, but also human impact. And so stories like that we need to be sharing to say this is definitely the way to go. And the value for money is so strong from acting in advance that actually it doesn't matter if the hurricane went slightly north and you were slightly wrong in where you were targeting your anticipatory action. It's a no regret. You lost practically nothing, but actually you've gained so much that actually really focusing on that no regret side of things and the evidence, I think, will help us make the case, because we're all converts, but we need to convert the rest of the humanitarian sector to think like this, and that's a bigger battle, to be perfectly honest. And they won't shift without evidence.
Thank you, Nikki, and I agree, because I've heard that from the word of many donors myself, about that need for evidence, and it's something that even us as START we're working on. We're not perfectly where we want to be, but it's something that definitely I think there needs to be a greater push. So I totally agree with this point. And I am conscious that there is a lot of questions, and Anna, you've been moderating and you want to bring in some questions from the attendees. So Anna, I'll pass to you.
Thank you, Ira, and thanks our speakers for this great intervention. There are actually a lot of interesting questions in the chat, so I was trying to pull them together and understand what are the main themes. So there are questions around the increasing funds, direct funding to national NGOs. How can this be done? And how can this also match with the Grand Bargain Agreement that was launched in 2016? It seems that donors are not meeting what were the promises that were made at the Grand Bargain. So what can be done to move forward in this agenda? Maybe shall we ask Nikki to start with this? She was nodding.
That's a tricky one. Okay, yeah. So I think absolutely that was part of the Grand Bargain, and you know it's absolutely an objective. But to come back to a sort of a point I was hinting at earlier, for us to be able to channel a lot of our money through national NGOs, we need a large network of people on the ground in each country, which we don't necessarily have. We need to find a way of helping the finance to flow through some kind of system that brings together groups, because we just don't have the capacity ourselves, I think, in many countries in the world, to be actually funding directly on the ground national NGOs. So I think we have to do two things. We have to work to build up the sort of aggregator network, which is what START Network and others are. But also we need to be working with our developing country government partners, I think, to be really clear to them that when they receive money at national level from the climate funds or from the international financial system, or wherever their money comes from aid, that they should be spending that not just centrally, but they should also be sharing it and actually sort of empowering and facilitating and funding their own NGOs and civil society organizations in countries. So really encouraging them to decentralize down to regions, and from regions down to communities, and make sure that they are also doing that. Because I think, so I'm only glancing at the comments, but somebody said the system's clogged, and I really think that is a real clog, trying to get money from central government out. And actually that opens up a whole kind of set of questions around budgetary processes and how they do that, and how they allocate money kind of according to need, and not kind of, whatever the priority might be, whatever's going on. We need to think about how it's how that system can work better, and sort of build on advocacy, I think, to make that kind of flow of funds better. But we've got quite a long way to go on that, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. Is there, Ailey or Laura, do you want to step in and add anything, or as you like?
I think it builds on the point that I was making earlier about complementarity. And I don't know. I mean, yes, okay, see the problem. If intermediaries take a large chunk of money for their work, then this is a problem, and we don't want that. But if a lot of money is spent on having British and Dutch civil servants in country to be able to give funds directly, that's also questionable if that's the best use of funds. So I'm not saying we should do the one or drop the other. I do think that we should think a bit more creatively on how we can ensure that local actors have the funds they need, because that's what we want. And does it then matter if it comes through an intermediary or not, if an intermediary honestly passes on the money that is needed and uses the money that it keeps for advocacy, for expertise, and other things? So I would be in favor of looking more at the result and working backwards from that, what we need in the process, rather than focusing so strictly on the 25% that should go directly to national actors.
Thank you, Laura. In the interest of time, maybe I would move forward. Or Ailey, do you have anything you want to add? So I'll pick up this question. It's really interesting. It's about the Nexus framework, and I know we touch about that. We talk about that. So the question is, would the panelists be open to actively supporting the integration of humanitarian development and peace effort within the HDP, the Humanitarian Development Peace Nexus framework? And specifically, are there initiatives or funding streams available that are dedicated to fostering resilience through this integrated approach?
Maybe I can answer very briefly, Anna, but I think we do get kicked off in about less than 60 seconds. But I would say that although it doesn't come through clearly that that's what we're doing, because I'm here speaking about our emergency response work, I actually think the rest of our portfolios at the foundation are trying to integrate exactly those in many ways. And we can definitely do better to complement or have the emergency funding that we do sort of leading more tightly into the livelihoods work that we do, but it's all a work in progress, and we too are learning. But I think that the appetite is definitely there. Oh, we have a bit of time.
And
sorry,
yes,
just
we
to
have
come in,
time.
We have 15 minutes. So this session was slightly longer, so we still have a bit to answer these questions, and then so I'll let you go, Anna.
I promised myself I wouldn't be the last person talking when the sound cuts out.
So maybe Laura, do you want to come in on this one as well? You made a comment before.
Yeah, so I made a comment about that there's a risk to it, but at the same time, when I look at the way my own directorate is organized, so I'm part of the humanitarian division, but it's part of a directorate which also pays attention to peace and stability, as well as migration, and also covers at even one higher level the economic field and the climate field. So we don't do enough, but we do a little bit, and we want it. And I just think we have to be smart about it and strategic about it. That's the only point I think I want to reiterate of what I said before.
Nikki, is there anything from your side you want to add on this point?
Yep. Sorry, I was kicked off the call there for a second. I think my internet died. Yes, so I'd say this is absolutely our ambition. I'd say it's well above my pay grade, and we will certainly be trying. I mean, in the meantime, we do what we can do, which is, certainly we're trying to do more, for example, in fragile and conflict affected states, and trying to bring in these approaches and kind of automatic scalability, because often the climate vulnerability is most intense in those countries, and they are the ones receiving the least aid by a long way, and the least climate finance. So huge scale of challenges, definitely an ambition, really not easy to do, but we are certainly going to try, I think is the easiest way of saying it. But yeah, I think I've got colleagues who probably would be better placed to answer that question properly. So if the questioner wants to get back to me, I can try and find out a proper, sort of more detailed answer.
Thank you. And so I would put another question to the panelists. This is actually really interesting also for the work we do at Star Network about risk sharing. And so the question is, how practical is the risk sharing by the donors? And what are the measures put in place to avoid risk transfer directly to local partners? I think that's a very hot topic at the moment, and try to understand how can local partners be be lifted by the risk, and at the same time in some way be compensated for the risk that they take. So maybe can I pick Laura?
Yeah, I thought you'd pick me. But I was just thinking of Nikki, and then maybe you can tell a little bit about the webinar that you were part of, because it was also very inspiring for me. But so from the Netherlands perspective, this risk sharing framework really is the opportunity to, across the whole delivery chain, see what risks are there and see who is best placed to address or preferably to mitigate them. So to avoid them from happening. At the same time, every partner in this chain has to look internally at barriers they have and what they can do to address them. And one of the things that we are also looking at is the due diligence discussion, because this is something that local actors have highlighted time and time again. And in that sense, it's a pity that this meeting is today and not next week, because on Friday I have an interesting internal meeting about this to see what are the possibilities, what can we do. So in general, I think what we should do is have that dialogue, and but then don't. I mean, if you look at, please go onto the internet, and or maybe I can put it in the chat if I have time. Go on the internet and look up the risk sharing framework, because there it's explained in the 8-step process how you do this, how you conduct such a dialogue, and what you can expect from it. And one of the things that comes out of it is that you in the end make an action plan, so don't only talk but actually take action as well. And that takes time, because you also have to internally look at what can you do, what do you need to change, and how you're going to do it.
Thank you, Laura. Maybe Nikki, is there anything you want to add on this from an FCDO point of view?
Sorry, my mute button. I'm not sure there is, actually. I think yeah, probably not. I'm thinking out loud here. I think, we do try very hard to make sure we're kind of bearing our share of the risk. And I think the thing that strikes me most actually is how much generally risks are increasing, and how we have to be as smart as possible about a sort of a big picture view of how we're managing those risks. And I think yeah, I'm not sure I have anything particularly to add, but it's I mean, for us in particular, a lot of what I do is that we help transfer risk. So for us, that is a big part of what we do, and we actually actively in our programs encourage the risk to be transferred to the international markets or to the private sector. Or so I think one of the really important parts of this work is actually helping partners identify their risks, like really know what the risks are, helping countries and communities to recognize the risks, and to recognize both the risks they face every day, but also the sheer magnitude of the risks that could come with disasters or with could be there in the future. So I would actually say that maybe there's a proactive appetite for better risk management within these programs, and actually thinking smarter about how we transfer risks. That actually is a part of how we do this, and let's not maybe shy away from it. Let's maybe make sure that it's kind of just properly done and costed, and that is actually sort of underpinning this work, because it's all about proactively managing risk now. I think that's for us, that is all about proactive management of risks now.
Thank you. And I mean, Haley, you have a probably different view coming from a different type of donor, so maybe it would be really interesting to hear from you as well.
Yeah, I think that our entire view and the way we're mandated to assess risk, to be honest, looks a little bit different. And I don't know, I mean, I don't actually know what that looks like at the bilateral donors. But for us, the way we see risk is predominantly, we don't really have a major concern about financial risk in that sense, but more broadly sort of reputational risk. And that's not something that really comes up so much for us as a concern in the humanitarian sector in general. So it's probably the first time since I've been working in the sector that somebody asks me, you know, what is my impression of how we look at risks in the sector. And the way we look at risk is the organization we're funding doing the best possible thing they can to save lives and livelihoods in emergency situations. But maybe I'm not fully understanding the question in terms of how you avoid risk transfer to local partners. So if I'm not, please let me know and I'll share more.
I think you raised the point of reputational risk, which was not discussed before. So no, thanks for bringing this into the conversation. Conscious of time, we have just 6 minutes to go. I would like to take a few minutes to wrap up. But before doing that, I would like to ask you very, very quickly, can you describe the future of anticipatory action in just 2 words? Let's start from Haley.
1 word, pioneering.
Thank you. Nikki?
So I have 2 options. One is do more, and the other is evidence and learn.
Absolutely. And Laura?
Trust in people.
Super. Great. So what I'm going to do in the next 5 minutes or less, I'll try to wrap up the session picking on the different concepts that were discussed today. So bear with me. I took some notes. I hope I will be able to really summarize properly the most important points that were discussed today. So obviously we started the discussion acknowledging the fact that the humanitarian need is increasing all over the world. Is humanitarian need linked to conflict, but also linked to climate. So we see all these needs connected. And unfortunately, what we don't see is the same increase in funding. So it's important to really think outside the box, pull in the private sector, pull in a different financial solution to address these needs, because the problem we have is that we will probably see this growing and growing, and we are all conscious that public finance is probably not the solution going forward. Anticipatory action makes sense for all of us, for us that work on it, but also for donors that provide funding. It's a more dignified, is a way to help people in a even a better with a better financing approach, where funds can spend in a more efficient way and can basically support more people in a time where the need is still not there, in a sense that people don't need to be in crisis to be helped, but they can be helped to better cope with the crisis. It has been discussed, the fact that we need evidence, and we are all aware of that. Evidence is coming. It started to come in the sector, not at the rate, at the speed that we all would like to see. It's true that producing evidence for anticipatory action is always difficult because you are trying to compare something that has happened to something that has not happened. So we are all conscious of that, and we would like, even us working on this, want to see more evidence, wants to have the proof, the real evidence that what we are doing is making a huge impact on the population. So definitely a point for us to take away and to work harder on it. There was quite a lot of discussion around the importance of networks like START, and there was a really nice comment in the chat from Idris from Somalia saying, please fund more networks like START because they are providing funds to local organizations. And we also heard from the donors that a way for them to really make sure that funds arrive to the one most in need, to the small organization, are through this type of organization like START and other aggregators, because it's too complicated and too time consuming to reach directly each single organization. We are trying to do our best to do it, to really bring on board local members, local actors, to speak with communities, to make sure that their voices are incorporated in what we do, and our program really reflects the needs that we see on the ground. Laura talked a lot about trust, which is a really nice concept that I don't think came out a lot in our discussion. The importance of trusting each other, the importance of trusting the people we work with in the community, and also the importance of delivering this sense of trust. So the fact that also people can trust us as an intermediary and trust you as donors. We also discuss the need to bringing pieces together in the different funding flows. So humanitarian piece, development and climate, how to bring this all together, how to make things easier when we request funding, but at the same time being careful, because this has a political connotation. So we need to be careful of not being too simplistic and then have results that are actually against what we are trying to achieve. But obviously we always start from the prospect of people in the field and on the ground, and we always say they don't mind if we call this climate finance or humanitarian funding or development. People need support, and they need it across the whole spectrum, from like earlier, before the season of disaster, immediately before the hazard happened, immediately after, and then later to rebuild their life. So yeah, it's like a continuum. And what we are trying to do at START is really to shape our program in a way that can help people throughout the process. We have just 1 minute to go, so I just would like to really thank you, Ira, for the great introduction, our panelists, Laura, Nikki, and Haley, for the great intervention, and also all the people that joined the call today. We were 126 at some point, so great turnaround. Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you to panelists and Anna and everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Have a great afternoon.
Bye.
Or morning.
Thanks for inviting us. Bye-bye.
Thank you.